Chapter 6. There was someone crying. There was. The next day the rain poured down in torrents, and when Mary looked out of her window, the moor was almost hidden by gray mist and cloud. There could be no going out today. "What do you do in your cottage when it rains like this?" Mary asked Martha. "We try to keep out from under each other's feet, mostly," Martha answered. "Hey, there does seem to be a lot of us then. Mother's a good-tempered woman, but she gets fair moithered. The biggest ones go out in the cowshed and plays there. Deacon, he doesn't mind the wet. He goes out just the same as if the sun was shining. He said he sees things on rainy days as doesn't show when it's fair weather. He once found a little fox cub half drowned in its hole, and he brought it home in the bosom of his shirt to keep it warm. Its mother had been killed nearby, and the hole was swum out, and the rest of the litter was dead. He got it home now, and he found a half-drowned young crow another time, and he brought it home too, and he tamed it. It's named Soot, 'cause it's so black, and it hops and it flies about with him everywhere he goes." The time had come when Mary had forgotten to resent Martha's familiar talk. She'd even begun to find it interesting, and to be sorry when she stopped or went away. The stories she had been told by her ayah when she lived in India had been quite unlike those Martha had to tell, about the moorland cottage, which held 14 people who lived in 4 little rooms and never quite had enough to eat. The children seemed to tumble about and amuse themselves rather like a large, rough litter of good-natured collie puppies. Mary was most attracted by the mother and Deacon. When Martha told stories of what Mother said or what Mother did, they always sounded comfortable. "If I had a raven or a fox cub, I could play with it," said Mary, "but I have nothing." Martha looked perplexed. Can thou knit?" she asked. "No," answered Mary. "Can thou sew?" "No." "Can thou read?" "Yes." "Then why doesn't thou read something, or learn a bit of spelling? Thou's old enough to be learning thy book a good bit now." "I haven't any books," said Mary. "Those I had were left in India." "Ah, that's a pity," said Martha. "If Miss Medlock let thee go into the library, there's thousands of books in there." Mary did not ask where the library was, because she was suddenly inspired by a new idea. She made up her mind to go and find it herself. She was not troubled about Miss Medlock. Miss Medlock seemed to always be in her comfortable housekeeper's sitting room downstairs. In this strange place one scarcely ever saw anyone at all. In fact, there was no one to see but the servants, and when their master was away, they lived a luxurious life below stairs, where there was a huge kitchen, hung about with shining brass and pewter, and a large servants' hall, where there were 4 or 5 abundant meals served every day, and where a great deal of lively romping went on when Miss Medlock was out of the way. Mary's meals were served regularly, and Martha waited on her, but no one troubled themselves about her in the least. Miss Medlock came and looked at her every day or two, but no one inquired what she did or told her what to do. She supposed that perhaps this was the English way of treating children. In India, she'd always been attended by her ayah, who followed her about and waited on her hand and foot. She'd often been tired of her company. Now she was followed by nobody, and was learning to dress herself because Martha looked as though she thought she was silly and stupid when she wanted to have things handed to her and put on her. "Hasn't thou got good sense?" she said once when Mary had stood waiting for her to put on her gloves for her. "Our Susan Ann is twice as sharp as thee, and she's only 4 years old. Sometimes thou looks fair soft in the head." Mary had worn her contrary scowl for an hour after that, but it had made her think several entirely new things. She stood at the window for about 10 minutes this morning after Martha had swept up the hearth for the last time and gone downstairs. She was thinking over the new idea which had come to her when she had heard of the library. She did not care very much about the library itself because she had read very few books, but to hear of it brought back to her mind the 100 rooms with closed doors. She wondered if they were all really locked, and what would she find if she could get into any of them? Were there really 100? Why shouldn't she go and see how many doors she could count? It'd be something to do on this morning when she could not go out. She had never been taught to ask permission to do things, and she knew nothing at all about authority. So she would have not thought it necessary to ask Miss Medlock if she might walk about the house, even if she had seen her. She opened the door of the room and she went into the corridor, and then she began her wanderings. It was a long corridor, and it branched into other corridors, and it led her up short flights of steps, which mounted to others again. There were doors, and there were pictures on the walls. Sometimes there were pictures of dark, curious landscapes, but oftenest they were portraits of men and women in strange, grand costumes made of satin and velvet. She found herself in one long gallery whose walls were covered with these portraits. She had never thought there could be so many in any house. She walked slowly down this place and stared at the faces which also seemed to stare at her. She felt as if they were wondering what a little girl from India was doing in their house. Some were pictures of children, little girls in thick satin frocks which reached to their feet and stood out all about them, and boys with puffed sleeves and lace collars and long hair, or with big ruffs around their neck. She always stopped to look at the children and wonder what their names were, and where they had gone, and why they had worn such odd clothes. There was a stiff, plain little girl, rather like herself. She wore a green brocade dress and held a green parrot upon her finger. Her eyes had a sharp, curious look. "Where do you live now?" Mary said aloud to her. "I wish you were here,"